Welcome and thanks for returning back to the Daily Bread Bible Study here for day 138. This is Sunday, May 17th, 2020. We are exploring the first chapters of Ezra, chapters 1 through 4. Now, just a brief overview of Ezra. So Ezra is about the returned community, the post-exile community who is given leave by Cyrus the Great of Persia to come back to Jerusalem. And so it's a story of Cyrus the Great giving them permission to go back and rebuild the temple, and the challenges that come in that way, and the joys that happen when the temple is rebuilt as well too. So it's about this community trying to regain its heart and also its focus on God. This should also be compared with the two books after it, Nehemiah and then Esther. So we have these two stories, Nehemiah and Esther, connected with Ezra. As we will see, characters from these books will be in the book of Ezra as well. So without saying too much more, let's get into the book of Ezra. Now, in the first part, King Cyrus of Persia becomes a vessel through which God acts. He is labeled in other parts of the Bible as an anointed one of God, which means, God has blessed him specifically and working through him. An anointed one could be translated as Messiah. But yet again, we as Christians specifically see Jesus as the Messiah, versus Cyrus as a Messiah. But anyways, the difference is very subtle in this view, because mainly it's about, how is it that God works through people? God appoints people, God gives them God's Spirit, and they do mighty and powerful acts through them. So for King Cyrus, this mighty and powerful act is allowing the exiles to return home. And so they return home and seek to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Now, at the end of 2 Chronicles, we discussed how King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon exiled the Judeans. He took them away out of Jerusalem and brought them essentially to the Babylonian Empire and area. So the temple had fallen into disrepair, and the exiled leaders were not able to maintain it. And in fact, it was pretty disheveled and destroyed. There is great joy in hearing that this new monarch gives permission to to go to Jerusalem and the temple. And so thus the Spirit works through King Cyrus and works through these exiles to bring their offerings to Jerusalem. Many of the volunteers that are here, it's not quite subtly or explicitly stated, but a lot of these people are born outside of Jerusalem. There are a lot who are born in captivity. There are some called the returned exiles who, are older individuals who have lived, these decades of their life in order to come back in. But it's been a substantial amount of time. And so in Ezra chapter 2, we have a list of the people who have returned. In verse 2, it has some of the leaders, notably people named Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, and Mordecai. So Zerubbabel, it's a fun name to say. You should try it. Zerubbabel is mentioned as the governor of Judah in Haggai chapter 1. He also is notably in the lineage of Jesus in both Matthew and Luke. So there's a special connection for us Christians. Yeshua is mentioned as the high priest. The name could also be Joshua. The name could also even be Jesus as well. This is the name that Jesus, comes from. Yeshua, Jesus, it's that name. So here in this account, though, he is not the Messiah, right? But he is an agent of God as well, specifically the high priest. Haggai chapter 1 kind of confirms that as well too. Nehemiah is mentioned here as well. He, in the book of Nehemiah, is mentioned as a governor and a cupbearer for the king. And then Mordecai is a name mentioned here in Ezra chapter 2. He's an important Jewish official that we will see in the book of Esther, who will guide Esther and help the Jewish people survive through persecution. So there are two other names that are notable to mention here that I was looking up. Zariah is a priest, and then Rehum is a royal deputy who will oppose the rebuilding of Jerusalem. We will see more about this in Ezra chapter 4, verse 8. So the whole group, as it says in Ezra 2:64, the assembly together was 42,360, which if you look at it, it is a multiple of 12. So 12 being a holy indicator of the 12 tribes, it also, sacred number, a complete number, and so it's no surprise that this number is a multiple of 12. Also along this group is some divisions and classifications. Specifically, there are priests and Levites, people of the land around Jerusalem. There are singers and gatekeepers, temple servants, and all Israel. So, moving on to Ezra chapter 3, we see Yeshua the priest and Zerubbabel the governor lead the way for the people of God to seek to restore worship. Now, they build an altar and offer sacrifices according to the book of the law. And they observe the festival of booths even, and they gather resources to build a foundation for the temple of the Lord. As the foundation is laid, worship happens with words from the first dedication of the temple. I'm going to choose the version of Solomon. I mean, King David kind of mentions these words too, but specifically in 2 Chronicles 5:13, as King Solomon is dedicating the temple, you have there the cloud comes in when these words are sung, and the Spirit of God just fills the place. And so these are words connected with God filling this holy space there. The words for a lot of people are bittersweet, especially these older members, that really indicate that worship has been restored in the temple. Ezra 3:12 mentions that the older exiles weep at these words, lamenting the original destruction of the Temple of Solomon, while celebrating the joy of renewed worship in Jerusalem. Poetically, we've got thanksgiving and lament set side by side here, which is just a humbling thing to think about. We in our lives experience both joys and sadness sometimes at the same time, and it's just humbling to think about those holy and precious moments. So anyways, the takeaway here is that it's a very sacred and holy moment, especially for those who saw the destruction of the temple when they were younger. Ezra chapter 4 moves into some of the more negative parts of this. Sadly, politics get involved with worship. It can't just be this community comes in and worships, rebuilds the temple, but politics and challenges come involved for the people of God. The returned exiles find that the people of the land kind of insist upon helping rebuild the temple. The returned exiles decline the help, and due to this rejection, the people of the land then bribe government officials to suppress the returned Israelites. The returned Jews, I should say. Though it may seem innocent for the locals to want to help, the perspective in the book of Ezra is that they are actually trying to subvert God. The book of Ezra is focused on maintaining purity in the eyes of God, which is why worship is central in doing things by the book. Specifically, the book of the law is very important. They are worried about the impurity before God being the cause of the exile in the first place. And so if you're worried about the exile coming because you weren't faithful to God and observed the book of the law, well, then you're going to keep to the book of the law as best as possible. So this is why the foreign influences will be rejected both here and then also upcoming in chapter 10. We have in Ezra 10:11, it says, Now make confession to the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives. We'll actually see, those foreigners will be excluded from the community. So there's a whole lot of tension. But anyways, due to this political tension, the returned exiles stopped building until a later time, until the time of King Darius. This opposition seems strong, and in fact is, because a harshly worded letter is sent toward the king, slandering Jerusalem, slandering the Jews, and connecting the Jews with subversion. And so the king issues a cease and desist order to the Jews to stop building the temple due to the politics. Well, even though politics are hard and difficult and messy within the church, at times it's pretty much unavoidable. But another good thing, the hope in all of this, is that if God wills something to happen, God will make it happen. And so we will see next time that God will continue the plans to rebuild the temple. It will just take some time.